Abandoned. Adades solata gas stational oil dogs a trembling in confusion watching cars speed by. But what happened after this heartbreaking moment sparked a chain of events Noon could have foreseen and changed lives forever. The sun was setting behind a stretch of empty highway, casting long shadows over our remote gas station in the middle of nowhere. A modest convenience store stood next to the fuel pumps, its flickering neon sign barely holding on as the evening air grew colder. Among the shadows alone, golden retriever sat near the station's edge, his golden fur matted, with dirt in his eyes fixed on the horizon. He didn't bark, didn't move much. He just sat there waiting. This was Taylor, a once beloved family dog now left behind by his owner earlier. That afternoon, a black SUV had pulled into the gas station. A man impatient and distracted had stepped out, filled the tank, and gone inside to grab snacks. Taylor had excitedly jumped out of the car, eager to stretch his legs, but when the man returned, he either didn't notice or didn't care that Taylor wasn't back in the cart. The SUV sped away, leaving Taylor confused and alone. The gas station attendant, Mark, noticed the dog sitting near the pump. Long after the SUV had gone, he walked out with a bag of chips in hand, his brows furrowed in concern. Buddy," he said softly, crouching down. Taylor perked up, his tail wagging faintly, but his gaze kept drifting back to the road, as if expecting his owner to return. Mark stood unsure of what to do as darkness fell. Taylor remained at the gas station. Occasionally, he would dart toward passing cars. His ears perked up at the sound of an engine, only to retreat when the car signaled him. The sight was enough to break anyone's heart, but for Mark it was especially difficult. They couldn't shake the thought of how loyal the dog seemed, waiting for someone who might never come back. Word began to spread among the few customers who passed through. Some left scraps of food for Taylor, while others shook their heads in disbelief at the cruelty of his situation. "People are so careless," an elderly woman muttered as she handed Mark a piece of bread for the dog, unbeknownst to everyone. Taylor's abandonment was the beginning of an extraordinary journey. What started as a heart-wrenching scene of loss would soon lead to moments of incredible resilience, compassion, and an ending that Noon could have predicted. Mark couldn't get Taylor out of his mind. As the night wore on, the golden retriever lay curled up near the station's entrance, shivering slightly in the cold, despite being a dog person. Himself, Mark knew it couldn't bring Taylor home. His landlord had a strict no-pets policy, but leaving the dog out there waiting for an owner who might never, and felt equally wrong at midnight after his shift ended. Mark walked back outside with an old kid that found in the storage clothes. "There you go, buddy," he murmured, draping the blanket over Taylor. The dog wagged his tail softly but didn't move from his spot. Mark crouched beside him and scratched behind his ears. "You deserve better than this by morning." Taylor was still residing vigilantly by the pump. Word of his abandonment continued to spread among the regulars at the gas station. A young couple stopped by to give him water, and a trucker left half as sandwich for him, despite the kindness of strangers. Taylor's eyes remained fixated on the road, his faith in his owner's return unwavering. 3 days passed, and Mark began to notice a change in Taylor. His once hopeful gaze had dimmed and his energy waned. The sight filled Mark with a sense of urgency. If Noon came to claim the dog, something bad could happen to him. Determined to take action, Mark posted a picture of Taylor on social media with a brief caption left behind at the gas station. "This loyal pup has been waiting for days. Does anyone recognize him? He needs a home." The post quickly gained traction, with dozens of shares and comments pouring in. People offered suggestions, some expressing outrage at the situation, while others volunteered to adopt Taylor. Still, Noon came for word, claiming to be his owner. On the 5th day, a middle-aged woman named Lisa arrived at the gas station, having seen Mark's post. She introduced herself as a volunteer at an animal rescue center. "We can't take him," and she offered. "It's clear he needs medical attention and a safe place to stay." Mark hesitated. While he wanted Taylor to be cared for, he couldn't shake the feeling that the dog story wasn't finished. What if his owner comes back? Lisa frowned. 5 days is a long time for a dog to wait. If someone cared about him, they'd have been here. By now, reluctantly, Mark agreed together. They coaxed Taylor into Lisa's cart. The golden retriever seemed hesitant at first, looking back at the gas station one last time. Before climbing in, Mark felt a pang of guilt as the car drove away, but it told himself it was for the best of their rescue center. Taylor received a full medical checkup. The vet noted that while he was healthy, overall, has showed signs of mild malnutrition and stress. The staff at the center worked hard to make him comfortable, but Taylor remained withdrawn, heat sparingly, and spent most of his time lying by the windows, staring outside, as if still waiting for someone. Meanwhile, Mark couldn't stop thinking about Taylor. Every time he saw the empty spot near the pump, he felt a goring sense of loss. He'd be checking Lisa's updates about Taylor daily, hoping for good news. 2 weeks after Taylor arrived at the shelter, a breakthrough occurred. Lisa called Mark with an excited teen in her voice. "You won't believe this, but Taylor saved another dog today." Mark was stunned. "What do you mean?" Lisa explained that a stray puppy had been brought into the center. Terrified and trembling, the staff placed the puppy in the same room as Taylor, hoping the older dog's calm demeanor would help soothe the newcomer to everyone's surprise. Taylor immediately took on a protective role, gently nudging the puppy toward the food bowl and lying beside him to keep him warm. The transformation in Taylor's behavior was astonishing. He seemed to come alive again. Lisa sent Mark a video of the interaction, which brought a smile to his face. It's like he found a new purpose. Lisa said maybe helping others is what Taylor needs. Inspired by this, Lisa and the rescue center team began introducing Taylor to more dogs in need. Over time, he became a sort of the rappy dog for the shelter, helping nervous or traumatized animals adjust to their new surroundings. Taylor's story even drew local media attention with a small news segment highlighting his role at the shelter. The headline read, "Abandoned Dog Becomes a Hero for Strays." Despite the newfound joy Taylor brought, Mark still felt a lingering sense of responsibility. He visited the rescue center one afternoon wanting to see Taylor for himself. When the golden retriever spotted him, his tail wagged furiously and rushed to greet him. Mark knelt down, letting Taylor lick his face as a flood of emotion washed over him. "You remember, Maha?" Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. Taylor barked softly as if to say, how could I forget? A week after Mark's visit to the shelter, Lisa received an unexpected call. A man claimed to be Taylor's original owner. He introduced himself as Jeremy and explained that he'd seen Taylor's story on the local news. "That's my dog," he said firmly. "His name's not Taylor, it's Buddy. You need to get them back." Lisa was immediately skeptical. "If this is your dog, why did you leave him at a gas station?" she asked. Jeremy hesitated, then launched into an explanation. He claimed that Hen Buddy had been traveling cross-country when his car broke down at the gas station with no money for repairs. She'd been forced to hitch a ride to the nearest town. "I planned to come back for him." Jeremy insisted, but things got complicated, and it took longer than I expected. Lisa remained cautious. "Do you have any proof that he's your dog?" Jeremy quickly rattled off details about Buddy's appearance and habits, his favorite treat is scaring his hind leg from an old injury, and how he loved to chase tennis balls. The descriptions matched Taylor perfectly. Lisa agreed to let them visit the shelter, but made it clear that she would prioritize Taylor's well-being above all else. When Jeremy arrived at the shelter the next day, his demeanor raised red flag. She was disheveled with an impatient attitude and little interest in discussing Taylor's needs. The moment they saw the dog, had called out, "Buddy." Taylor's reaction, however, was lukewarm at best. The golden retriever approached Jeremy cautiously, his tail wagging faintly, but without the enthusiasm he showed for Mark or Lisa. Lisa observed the interaction closely. "He doesn't seem too excited to see you," she noted. Jeremy shrugged, AK probably just confused. It's been a while. Despite her reservations, Lisa allowed Jeremy to spend time with Taylor under supervision during their interaction. Jeremy attempted to coax the dog with commands, but Taylor didn't respond. It became clear that while Jeremy might have once owned Taylor, their bond had been severely weakened or broken entirely. Mark, who had been informed of the situation by Lisa, showed up at the shelter unexpectedly. "I had to see this for myself," he told her. When Taylor spotted Mark, his entire demeanor changed. The dog barked excitedly, tail wagging furiously as she ran toward him. Mark knelt down and Taylor licked his face enthusiastically. "Looks like he's made up his mind," Mark said, half joking. Jeremy frowned. "He's my dog. I have the right to take him." Lisa stepped in, hurt and firm. "You left Taylor alone at a gas station for days. Whether intentional or not, that was neglect. And from what I'm seeing, Taylor is far happier and healthier here than he seems to be with you." Jeremy's frustration boiled over. "You can't just keep him from me. I'm his owner." Mark, sensing the tension, spoke up. "Maybe it's not about ownership. Maybe it's about what's best for Taylor." Lisa nodded. "Exactly. Legally, we need or stays here." Jeremy stormed out, muttering under his breath, but Lisa wasn't convinced the matter was over. "We'll need to be careful," she warned. Mark might come back later that evening. Mark couldn't shake the thought of Taylor potentially being taken away. Despite everything, he felt a deep connection to the dog, a bond forged through trust and care. Unable to sleep, had decided to take action after Jeremy's departure. Lisa took extra precautions at the shelters. She updated the security system and asked her staff to keep a close eye on Taylor during his stay. "If Jeremy comes back, I want to be ready," she told them. Meanwhile, Mark couldn't shake his worry about Taylor. He knew Jeremy had some claim to the dog, but his told him Taylor deserved better. Mark decided to visit the shelter again the next morning. When he arrived, he found Taylor in the play area, happily chasing a boar that one of the volunteers had thrown. "He looks like he's settling in well," Mark said, approaching Lisa. Lisa nodded. But that doesn't mean Jeremy won't try to reclaim him. I've started looking into legal advice to see what our options are." Mark frowned. "Think he has a chance?" Lisa hesitated. "If he can prove ownership legally speaking, it might, but the judge will also consider what's in the best interest of the dog." If Taylor's behavior with Jeremy yesterday was any indication, he's better off staying here, or with youth, a mention of Mark possibly adopting Taylor took him by surprise. He'd grown attached to the dog, but adopting him felt like a big step. Do you think I'd be a good fit for him? Marcus said. Lisa smiled. Taylor light soup every time. He's easy if you're willing to commit. I think you'd be a great match. Mark left the shelter deep in thought. Taylor had brought unexpected joy into his life, but adopting a dog wasn't a decision to take lightly. He spent the rest of the day researching what it would take to provide a good home for a dog like Taylor. By evening, he was leaning towards saying yes. The next day, Jeremy showed up at the shelter. Unannounced this time, he brought a tattered folder containing photos of him and Taylor, then known as Buddy, along with veterinary records and adoption papers. This proves she's my dog, Jeremy declared, slapping the folder onto Lisa's desk. Lisa reviewed the documents carefully. While they did confirm that Jeremy had once owned Taylor, they didn't tell the whole story. This might show that you adopted him, she said, looking Jeremy in the eye, but it doesn't explain why you left him at a gas station. That's neglect, and it's not something we take lightly. Jeremy's frustration grew. It told you it wasn't intentional. I had no choice. Lisa wasn't convinced. If you really cared about Taylor, you would have come back for him immediately. As the argument continued, Mark entered the shelter. He stopped short when he saw Jeremy and Lisa in the middle of a heated exchange. What's going on? Jeremy turned to him, pointing angrily. Who are you to this dog? You're not this owner. Mark kept this composure. No, I'm not, but I've been spending time with him, and I care about his well-being. Lisa intervened. Mark been helping us care for Taylor, unlike you. He's been consistent. Jeremy's expression darkened. This isn't over. If I have to take this to court, I will that evening. Mark and Lisa discussed the situation. Lisa explained that while Jeremy had presented proof of ownership, Taylor's behavior and well-being would play a critical role in any legal decision. The court might side with him, she admitted, but we can also present evidences showing that Taylor is better off without him. Mark thought for a moment before replying, what if formally applied to adopt Taylor? Would that strengthen the case against Jeremy? Lisa considered this. It might if the court sees that Taylor has a potential adopter who's willing to provide a stable and loving home. It could influence their decision. Mark nodded. Then I'll do it. Taylor deserves better than being dragged back into an unstable situation. Lisa handed him the adoption paperwork, and Mark filled it out on the spot. As she signed his name at the bottom, he felt a sense of determination. He wasn't just doing this for himself. He was doing it for Taylor. In the days that followed, the shelter prepared for the possibility of a legal battle. Lisa contacted an attorney who specialized in animal welfare cases, gathering evidence of Taylor's improved conditions since arriving at the shelter. Mark provided a detailed account of his interactions with Taylor, emphasizing their growing bond. Meanwhile, Jeremy's behavior became increasingly erratic. He left angry voicemails at the shelter and even showed up late one night, banging on the doors and demanding to see Taylor. Lisa called the police, and Jeremy was escorted off the property. This is harassment, Lisa told the officer. We're taking this matter seriously. Despite the tension, Taylor remained blissfully unaware of the conflict surrounding him. He continued to thrive at the shelter, eagerly greeting Mark during his daily visits. Each time Mark's a whim, his resolve to fight for Taylor grew stronger. 1 week later, Lisa received a notice from Jeremy's lawyers, stating that he intended to pursue custody of Taylor. The court date was set, and the shelter braced itself for the upcoming battle. It's going to be an uphill fight, Lisa told Mark, but I think we have a strong case. Mark nodded. Whatever it takes, I'm ready. As the court date loomed, Mark found himself reflecting on his growing attachment to Taylor. Each visit to the shelter strengthened their bond, and it became increasingly clear that Taylor saw him as more than just a visitor. He was a source of comfort and trust. But beneath this connection lay an undeniable tension: Jeremy's aggressive behavior and the uncertainty of the legal battle. One morning, Mark arrived at the shelter to take Taylor for a walk. As she entered the play yard, Taylor bounded toward him, tail wagging and eyes bright. Hey buddy, Mark said, kneeling to give the dog a scratch behind his ears, ready for a little adventure. Lisa approached with a somber expression. Mark, can wet off before you go. He stood, sensing the gravity of ton. Of course, what's going on? Lisa handed him a manila folder. I had a private investigator look into Jeremy. I wanted to be prepared for court, and well, I think you need to see this. Mark opened the folder and skimmed through the documents inside. Whatever had made his stomach churn: reports of previous complaints against Jeremy for neglecting animals, unpaid fines for leaving pets unattended, and even an eviction notice from a property where neighbors reported hearing dogs barking in distress. This is worse than I imagined. Mark said, his voice low. How is someone like him even allowed to own animals? Lisa sighed. The system isn't perfect, but this gives you a stronger case. It's how's a pattern of behavior that we can use to argue Taylor is better off elsewhere. Mark nodded, thought the weight of the situation pressed Heavily on him, what's our next step? Lisa explained that they would present the evidence in court alongside Taylor's improved condition at the shelter. But we need to stay vigilant. Shedded, Jeremy might not take this as well that evening. Mark received an unexpected phone call from an unfamiliar number. "Hello, Mark, it's Jeremy came." The reply, his voice was calm, almost too calm, which immediately put Mark wonge. "I want to talk, there's nothing to talk about." Mark said, keeping his tone firm. "Taylor's well-being is what matters, and I'm not backing down." Jeremy chuckled. "Darkly, you think you know what's best for my doggy. You don't know the first thing about him. I know enough to see he's happier and healthier without you." Mark shot back. The line went silent for a moment before Jeremy spoke again, his voice colder. "You're making a mistake. Mark Taylor is min, and I'll do whatever it takes to get them back." Before Mark could respond, Jeremy hung up. The conversation left Mark unsettled, but it also steeled his resolve. He couldn't let Taylor return to someone who had proven time, and again that he couldn't provide as a fee in loving home the next day. Mark shared the phone call with Lisa, who immediately reported it to their attorney. "This shows Jeremy's state of mind," Lisa said. "It's important that we document everything." Mark agreed, and began keeping a detailed record of his interactions with Jeremy, as well as his visits with Taylor. Meanwhile, the shelter continued to gather testimonials from volunteers and staff who had witnessed Taylor's transformation. One volunteer, a retired veterinarian named Doc Carter, offered to testify. "I've seen too many cases like this." Doc Carter said Taylor deserves better. As the days passed, Mark also faced challenges in his personal life. His boss, noticing his distracted demeanor at work, called him into his office. "Mark, is everything okay? You've been preoccupied lately." Mark hesitated before explaining the situation. With Taylor, to his surprise, his boss was understanding. "I've got dog too," he said. "I get it. Just make sure it doesn't interfere with your responsibilities here." Balancing his job and the legal battle was exhausting. But Mark was determined to see it through. He began spending his evenings preparing for court, going over every piece of evidence and practicing his testimony lycerin, and the attorney coached him on how to present his case, emphasizing the importance of staying composed. Under pressure one night, as Mark reviewed his notes, he received a text message from an unknown number. "You're wasting your time. Taylor will be mine." Again, soon Mark felt a surge of anger, but forced himself to stay calm, have forwarded the message to Lisa and their attorney, who advised him not to respond. "Jeremy is trying to rattle you," the attorney said. "Don't them." Despite the harassment, Mark refused to be intimidated. He knew he wasn't just fighting for Taylor. He was fighting for every animal who had ever been neglected or abandoned. The stakes were higher than he'd initially realized, and he wasn't about to back down at the shelter. Taylor continued to thrive. He had become a favorite among the staff and volunteers, who often remarked on his gentle nature and eagerness to please. Mark visited every day, and their bond grew stronger with each interaction. One afternoon, as they played fetch in the yard, Mark looked into Taylor's eyes and saw trust that hadn't been there before. It was a silent promise. No matter what happened, Mark would protect them. As the court date approached, Mark and Lisa received an unexpected piece of good news. A woman named Angela, who had previously lived in the same apartment complex as Jeremy, came forward with a statement. She described witnessing Jeremy's neglect firsthand and even provided photos of Taylor looking malnourished during that time. "This could be the tipping point," Lisa said, showing the photos to Mark. "It's hard evidence of what Taylor endured." Mark felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time since the battle began, have felt like they might actually win. The courtroom was smaller than Mark had imagined, but its atmosphere felt the heavy with tension. On one side sat Jeremy, his posture defiant and his face set in a scowl. On the other side, Mark sat with Lisa and their attorney, who quietly reviewed the stack of evidence they had prepared. Taylor wasn't allowed in the courtroom, but his presence was keenly felt. Everything hinged on this moment as the proceedings began. Jeremy's lawyer painted a picture of a misunderstood dog owner who had fallen on hard times. "My client loves Taylor," the lawyer stated emphatically. The alleged neglect was the result of financial struggles, not a lack of care or affection. Mark clenched his fists under the table, resisting the urge to interrupt. Lisa leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm. We'll have our chance." When it was Mark's turn to testify, he walked to the stand, took an oath, and faced the judge. Their attorney guided him through a series of questions designed to highlight his interactions with Taylor and the evidence of Jeremy neglect. "Miss Anderson, can you describe Taylor's condition when you first encountered him at the gas station?" the attorney asked. Mark took a deep breath. He was emaciated, dehydrated, and visibly distressed. His were showing, and he had so sun his paw from walking on hot pavement. It was clear he hadn't been cared for in a long time. The attorney handed a photograph to the judge and jury. It's how Taylor as Mark had around him, thin, scared, and exhausted. A murmur spread through the room as the image was passed around. Jeremy's lawyer attempted to discredit Mark's testimony, suggesting that he was exaggerating the severity of Taylor's condition. "You're not a veterinarian, are you, Mr. Anderson?" "No, but I've worked with animals for years as a volunteer at shelters." Mark replied evenly, "I know what a healthy dog looks like," and Taylor was far from healthy. The lawyer's cross-examination continued, but Mark held his ground. His calm demeanor and clear, detailed answers made an impression on the judge, who nodded thoughtfully as she spoke. Next, Lisa and the shelter staff testified. "Dr. Carter, their tired veterinarian, provided expert analysis of Taylor's condition. In my professional opinion, Taylor was neglected for an extended period." She said, "The evidence suggests she was not receiving adequate food, water, or medical care." Jeremy shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but maintained his defiant expression. When it was his turn to testify, he insisted that I loved Taylor and had simply made a mistake by leaving him at the gas station. "I was coming back for him. Heck, claimed it just needed some time to get my life together." His words rang hollow, especially when the court presented the evidence of his past neglect. Angela, the former neighbor, took the stand and shared her first-hand account of seeing Taylor left outside in extreme weather with little to no shelter. "It broke my heart to see him like that," she said, her voice trembling. "No dog deserves to be treated that way." Throughout the trial, Mark couldn't help but notice Jeremy's occasional glances in his direction. They weren't the hostile glare she'd expected, but something more unsettling, a mix of guilt and resentment. It was as if Jeremy recognized that Mark genuinely cared for Taylor, but couldn't bring himself to admit his own failings. The emotional weight of the trial took its toll everyone involved during recess. Mark stepped outside to clear his head. He found himself staring at the courthouse's steps, replaying the events of the past few weeks in his mind. Could he have done more to prevent this situation? Washed owing enough. Now Lisa joined him, handing him a bottle of water. "You're doing great," she said, her assuring, "Don't second-guess yourself." Mark nodded but remained silent. They knew the stakes were high, not just for Taylor, but for the broader message the case would send about animal welfare. As the trial neared its conclusion, both sides delivered their closing arguments. Jeremy's lawyer pleaded for leniency, emphasizing his client intentions to change. Mark's attorney, however, focused on Taylor's needs. "This is not about punishing Mr. Thompson," she said, gesturing toward Jeremy. "It's about ensuring Taylor has the safe, loving home he deserves." The judge adjourned the court to deliberate, leaving everyone in a state of nervous anticipation. Mark returned to the shelter that evening and spent time with Taylor, who greeted him with his usual enthusiasm. Masha played with the dog in the yard. Mark felt a deep sense of responsibility. "No matter what happens," she whispered, "I'll always fight for you." The next morning, the judge delivered her ruling. The room was silent. Tashi began her tone measured and authoritative. "After reviewing the evidence and testimony, it is clear that Taylor suffered from neglect while in Miss Thompson's care. While the court acknowledges Mr. Thompson's claims of financial hardship, this does not excuse his failure to provide basic necessities for the dog's well-being." Mark held his breath, his heart pounding. "Therefore, custody of Taylor is granted to Mr. Anderson, who has demonstrated a commitment to the dog's health and happiness." A wave of relief over Marcus. The words sank in. Lisa squeezed his shoulder and tears welled up in his eyes. Jeremy, on the other hand, stormed out of the courtroom without a word. As they left the courthouse, reporters and onlookers approached Mark for comments. He simply said, "Taylor deserves a life filled with love and care, and I'm honored to give that to him at the shelter." Taylor seemed to sense the shift when Mark arrived to take him home. The dog wagged his tail furiously and leapt into his arms. It was the start of a new chapter for both of them. The weeks following the court ruling brought newfound joy for Mark and Taylor. At beneath the surface of their happiness, a subtle tension began to build. Jeremy's departure from the courtroom hadn't felt like the end of the story. Mark couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that the man wouldn't let go of Taylor so easily. Life with Taylor flourished. The dog had settled comfortably into Mark's home, his once guarded demeanor giving way to a playful and loving personality. Mark's neighbors often stopped to admire the golden retriever during their walks, commenting on how healthy and happy he looked. Now, one sunny afternoon, Mark and Taylor were playing fetch in the backyard when Lisa arrived unexpectedly. Her expression was serious, a stark contrast to her usual cheerful demeanor. "Mark, we need to talk," she said, her voice low. "I just got off the phone with Doc Carter's. She's been receiving strange calls asking about Taylor. Someone's been inquiring about where he's staying." Mark frowned. Did she say who it was? No, but she said the person didn't sound friendly. She thought it might be Jeremy. Mark's grip tightened on Taylor's leash. If he thinks she's going to take Taylor back, he's sorely mistaken. Later that evening, as Mark prepared dinner, he heard Taylor growl from the living room. The dog stood by the window, his fur bristling. Life with Taylor flourished. The dog had settled comfortably into Mark's home, his once guarded demeanor giving way to a playful and loving personality. Mark's neighbors often stopped to admire the golden retriever during their walks, commenting on how healthy and happy he looked. Now, one sunny afternoon, Mark and Taylor were playing fetch in the backyard when Lisa arrived unexpectedly. Her expression was serious, a stark contrast to her usual cheerful demeanor. "Mark, we need to talk," she said, her voice low. "I just got off the phone with Doc Carter's. She's been receiving strange calls asking about Taylor. Someone's been inquiring about where he's staying." Mark frowned. Did she say who it was? No. But she said the person didn't sound friendly. She thought it might be Jeremy. Mark's grip tightened on Taylor's leash. If he thinks she's going to take Taylor back. He's sorely mistaken. Later that evening, as Mark prepared dinner, he heard Taylor growl from the living room. The dog stood by the window, his fur bristling, settled comfortably into Mark's home, his once guarded demeanor giving way to a playful and loving personality. Mark's neighbors often stopped to admire the golden retriever during their walks, commenting on how healthy and happy he looked. Now one sunny afternoon, Mark and Taylor were playing fetch in the backyard when Lisa arrived unexpectedly. Her expression was serious, a stark contrast to her usual cheerful demeanor. "Mark, we need to talk," she said, her voice low. "I just got off the phone with Doc Carter's. She's been receiving strange calls asking about Taylor. Someone's been inquiring about where he's staying." Mark frowned. Did she say who it was? No. But she said the person didn't sound friendly. She thought it might be Jeremy. Mark's grip tightened on Taylor's leash. If he thinks she's going to take Taylor back. He's sorely mistaken. Later that evening, as Mark prepared dinner, he heard Taylor growl from the living room. The dog stood by the window, his fur bristling. Life churned. Asher cognized their retreating form. Jeremy. Taylor barked furiously, straining against the leash. "Easy boy," Mark said, his voice firm but shaking slightly. He called the police, who arrived shortly after and took our port. While they couldn't apprehend Jeremy without proof of intent, they assured Mark that they would patrol the area more frequently the next day. Lisa visited again, her concern evident. "Mark, I don't think Jeremy's just going to walk away. He's desperate, and desperate people do reckless things." Mark nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep Taylor safe. I won't let them go back to a life of neglect." Together, they brainstormed ways to strengthen Taylor's security. Lisa suggested a tracking collar, which would allow Mark to monitor Taylor's location at all times. They also arranged for a few trusted friends to help keep watch, ensuring that Taylor was never alone, despite the precautions. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that Jeremy was planning something. His fears were confirmed one rainy evening when Hare turned home from a late meeting to find his back door ajar. Panic surged through him. Asha called out for Taylor. The bar Mark came from the living room, followed by the sound of a struggler rushing inside. Mark found Jeremy attempting to drag Taylor out the door. The dog fought back, growling and snapping, but Jeremy had a firm grip on his collar. "Let goof him," Mark shouted, grabbing a broom and charging toward Jeremy. Start led. Jeremy released Taylor and stumbled backward. The dog wasted no time. He lunged at Jeremy, forcing him to the ground. Mark quickly pulled Taylor back, dialing the police as Jeremy scrambled to his feet and fled. The police arrived within minutes. Staking statements and gathering evidence, they found a crowbar near the back door, indicating that Jeremy had forced his way, and "This is serious." One officer told Mark, "We issue our straining order and increase patrols in the area." Mark nodded, his heart still racing. He looked down at Taylor, who had settled at his feet, his protective instincts still on high alert. "You saved the day, buddy," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. The incident galvanized Mark's determination to protect Taylor at all costs. She enforced the security measures at home, including installing reinforced locks and adding floodlights to the backyard. Lisa organized a neighborhood watch, ensuring that everyone was on high alert for any suspicious activity. Meanwhile, Mark filed additional charges against Jeremy for attempted theft and breaking and entering. The case gained attention in the local media, shining a spotlight on animal neglect and the lengths people would go to protect their pets. The days passed. The community rallied around Mark and Taylor. Neighbors brought over supplies, offered words of encouragement, and shared stories of their own beloved pets. The local shelter even organized a fundraiser to support animal welfare, using Taylor's story as inspiration. For the first time since the ordeal began, Mark felt a glimmer of hope. Taylor, too, seemed to sense the shift. His tail wagged more often, and his playful energy returned. Together, they had faced a harrowing challenge and emerged stronger. The days following the attempted break-in brought a surprising wave of support from Mark's community. Taylor became a symbol of resilience, his story shared in local newsletters and social media groups. The increased attention brought unexpected connections, including a visit from Sarah, a volunteer at a nearby animal shelter. "I read about what happened," Sarah said when she stopped by with a bag of dog treats and toys. "Taylor is incredible, and what you've done for him is inspiring. We'd love for you to share his story at shelter event." Mark hesitated, unsure if he wanted to relive the harrowing experience in front of an audience, but Sarah's enthusiasm was contagious, and he eventually agreed, realizing it could be an opportunity to advocate for better animal welfare. Meanwhile, Jeremy's actions continued to cast a shadow. The Hope Taylor too seemed to sense the shift. His tail wagged more often, and his playful energy returned together. They had faced a harrowing challenge and emerged stronger. The days following the attempted break-in brought a surprising wave of support from Mark's community. Taylor became a symbol of resilience, his story shared in local newsletters and social media groups. The increased attention brought unexpected connections, including a visit from Sarah, a volunteer at a nearby animal shelter. I read about what happened. Sarah said when she stopped by with a bag of dog treats and toys, "Taylor is incredible, and what you've done for him is inspiring. We'd love for you to share his story at shelter event." Mark hesitated, unsure if he wanted to relive the harrowing experience in front of an audience, but Sarah's enthusiasm was contagious, and he eventually agreed, realizing it could be an opportunity to advocate for better animal welfare. Meanwhile, Jeremy's actions continued to cast a shadow. The brought a surprising wave of support from Mark's community. Taylor became a symbol of resilience, his story shared in local newsletters and social media groups. The increased attention brought unexpected connections, including a visit from Sarah, a volunteer at a nearby animal shelter. I read about what happened. Sarah said when she stopped by with a bag of dog treats and toys, "Taylor is incredible, and what you've done for him is inspiring. We'd love for you to share his story at shelter event." Mark hesitated, unsure if he wanted to relive the harrowing experience in front of an audience, but Sarah's enthusiasm was contagious, and he eventually agreed, realizing it could be an opportunity to advocate for better animal welfare. Meanwhile, Jeremy's actions continued to cast a shadow. The Hope Taylor power of love and care. As Mark recounted Taylor's journey from abandonment at a gas station to becoming a beloved companion, the crowd listened intently. Taylor sat at his feet, this golden fur gleaming in the sunlight, occasionally wagging his tail, Asaph acknowledging the applause. "Taylor taught me something important," Mark concluded, his voice is steady. "He showed me how resilience and trust can grow even in the face of neglect. Every animal deserves a second chance." Just like he had, the crowd erupted in applause, and Sarah approached the stage to thank Mark for his words. "You've inspired more people than you know," she said, handing him a framed certificate of appreciation. After the event, Mark noticed a familiar face lingering at the edge of the crowd. Jeremy. He was unkempt and avoided eye contact, but seemed intent on staying close. Taylor surprisingly didn't growl or bark. Instead, he looked at Jeremy with a calm curiosity, his tail wagging slightly. Mark approached cautiously. "Jeremy, what are you doing here?" Jeremy shifted uncomfortably. "I heard about the event. I just wanted to see." Taylor. Mark's first instinct was to send him away, but something in Jeremy's tone gave him pause. "He's doing well, as you can see," Mark said, keeping his voice neutral. Jeremy nodded, his eyes fixed on Taylor. "I'm glad. I know I don't deserve him back. I was a terrible owner, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." The unexpected apology left Mark speechless for a moment. He had expected defiance or excuses, not remorse. "It's not about me," Jeremy have finally said. "It's about Taylor. He deserves the best life, and that's what I'm trying to give him." Jeremy nodded again, tears brimming in his eyes. "I understand. Thank you for taking care of him." Mark watched as Jeremy to leave, a strange mix of relief and pity wasing over him for all his faults. Jeremy seemed like a man burdened by his past mistakes. Still, Mark knew that Taylor's safety came first, and he wasn't willing to take any chances. The encounter with Jeremy became a catalyst for deeper reflection. Mark realized that his own journey with Taylor had not only transformed the dog's life, but also reshaped his own. He had gone from being a solitary, cautious individual to someone who valued connection and community. Lisa noticed the change too. "So you're different," Mark, she said one evening as they walked Taylor together. You're more open, more willing to trust." Taylor taught me that, Mark admitted with a smile. "He took a chance on Meso. It figured I owed it to him to do the same." As the weeks turned into months, Taylor's story continued to inspire the shelter, led to invitations for Mark to speak at schools and community centers, where he shared lessons about compassion, responsibility, and the profound bond between humans and animals. Jeremy, meanwhile, kept this distance. There were no further incidents, though Mark occasionally caught glimpses of him in the neighborhood. It seemed the man had resigned himself to being an observer in Taylor's only source of comfort during his darkest days. "It thought I was protecting him by leaving him behind," Jeremy wrote, "but now I see I was just running away from my responsibilities. Thank you for giving him the life I couldn't." Mark folded the letter and stared at it for a long time. It didn't absolve Jeremy of his past actions, but it added a layer of humanity to the story, a reminder that people like animals could grow and change under the right circumstances. The bond between Mark and Taylor only deepened as time went on. Together, they became advocates for animal welfare. Their story, a beacon of hope for others facing similar challenges, that gone from being abandoned at a gas station to becoming a beloved symbol of resilience. And Mark had transformed you to no longer a man weighed down by caution, but someone who embraced the unexpected joys that came with opening his heart. It had been several months since the shelter event, and Jeremy's emotional letter. Mark and Taylor had settled into a routine that felt peaceful, yet purposeful. Taylor continued to thrive, his coat shining and his demeanor confident. He had become a local hero of sorts, recognized by neighbors and even strangers during their walk. However, one late afternoon, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the neighborhood, a sudden disturbance broke the calm. Mark was in the backyard with Taylor throwing a frisbee when he noticed a figure at the verge of his property. It was Jeremy. Mark's heart sank. As the man hesitated by the fence, his posture and uncertain before Mark could say anything. Taylor perked up, his ears alert. They ran toward the fence, barking though his tail wagged cautiously. Mark called him back, unsure of Jeremy's intentions. "What are you doing here?" Jeremy, Mark said, keeping his voice calm but firm. Jeremy raised his hands in a pleading gesture. "I'm not there to cause trouble. I just needed to see him one last time." Mark hesitated, hadn't want to escalate the situation. But he also didn't trust Jeremy fully. "You wrote to me. You said you understood. Taylor is safe here." "Jeremy, let them be." "I know," Jeremy said, his voice trembling. I've been trying to get my life together. I'm in a program now. I've been sober for 90 days. And seeing Taylor was the only thing that kept me going." Taylor stood at Mark's side, now watching Jeremy intently, his usual distrust of them seemed to have faded into something soft. As if he sensed the sincerity in Jeremy's words, Mark sighed, unsure how to respond. "Look, Jeremy, I'm glad you're trying to make changes, but Taylor is my responsibility now. He's happy here. I'm not asking for him back," Jeremy said quickly. "I know I don't deserve that, but I wanted to apologize to him for abandoning him." Mark frowned, surprised by the request. "You think he'll understand?" "An apology," Jeremy nodded. "Dogs forgive more than people. Do I just need to say it?" Mark debated eternally. Taylor seemed calm, and Jeremy's presence, while unplanned, didn't feel threatening. After a moment, he opened the gates lightly, keeping a firm grip on Taylor's leash. Jeremy stepped through his movements, cautious as if afraid of spooking the dog. "Hey, Taylor," Jeremy said softly, kneeling a few feet away, his voice cracked with emotion. "I'm sorry, buddy. I should have never left you like that. You deserved better than me." Taylor tilted his head, his eyes studying Jeremy intently. Then, to Mark's amazement, Taylor stepped forward, nudging Jeremy's hand with his nose. It was a gesture of acceptance. Simple yet profound. Tears streamed down Jeremy's face as she gently stroked Taylor's for "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The moment was brief but powerful. Mark watched, feeling a mix of emotions, relief, sympathy, and an unshakable protectiveness over Taylor. After a few minutes, Jeremy stood wiping his face. "Algano," he said, his voice steadier. "Thank you, Mark, for everything." Mark nodded, leading Taylor back inside. As Jeremy left, the interaction lit in Mark's mind long after the sun had set, leaving him with more questions than answers. The following week, Mark received an unexpected call from Sarah, the shelter volunteer. "Mark, you need to see this," she said, urgently, sending him a link to a local news article. The headline read, "Former Doggoat Earns Advocate for Rescue Animals." The article detailed Jeremy's efforts to volunteer nearby shelter, using his story of losing Taylor as a cautionary tale about neglect and second chances. It included a photo of Jeremy holding a rescue dog, his expression determined yet humble. Mark felt a surge of pride, mingled with disbelief. He hadn't expected Jeremy to turn his life around so drastically. But it seemed Taylor's impact had extended far beyond their little home. That night, as Mark sat on the couch with Taylor curled up beside him, he reflected on the twists and turns their journey had taken. What had begun as an act of rescue had grown into something much larger, testament to the ripple effects of kindness and the capacity for change. The next morning, Mark received another surprise. A letter arrived in the mail, this time from the shelter. Inside was an invitation to speak at a national animal welfare conference with Taylor. As the featured guest, the conference organizers had been inspired by their story and wanted them to share it with a broader audience. Mark smiled as she read the letter, scratching Taylor behind the ears. "Well, buddy," he said, "looks like we've got more work to do." Taylor wagged his tail, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and trust. Together, they had already changed so much, and their journey was far from over. Mark sat in his home office, the invitation to the National Animal Welfare Conference open on his desk. It felt surreal, being asked to share their story with an audience of advocates and experts. Taylor, ever his loyal companion, sat at Mark's feet, occasionally nudging his leg for attention. "I guess we're making waves, shoe buddy," Mark said, reaching down to scratch Taylor behind the ears. The dog wagged his tail in response, a warm reminder of the bond they had built. Amidst the excitement, Mark felt a tug of apprehension sharing their story. mean revisiting painful moments, not just for himself, but for Taylor too. Mark's phone buzzed. It was Sarah, the shelter volunteer, who had played a crucial role in their journey. "Hey Mark," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. "Have you decided yet? The conference is just a month away. I'm still thinking about it." Mark admitted, "It's a big stage, and I'm not sure if we're ready for something like that." Sarah Tun softened. "Mark, you and Taylor have already inspired so many people. This is a chance to amplify that impact. Think about all the animals and owners who could benefit from hearing your story." Mark sighed, glancing at Taylor, who had sprawled out on the rug, looking utterly content. "I'll give it some thought." The promised ending the call over the next few days. Mark wrestled with his decision. On one hand, he wanted to honor Taylor's journey and the changes it had sparked, not just in their lives, but in Jeremy and countless others. On the other hand, he worried about exposing their private struggles to public scrutiny. The internal debate reached a tipping point during one of their walks. Taylor had become somewhat of a local celebrity, and it wasn't unusual for people to stop and ask about him. But that day, a young boy approached with his mother, the boy wash holding a leash attached to a nervous-looking puppy. "Is this Taylor?" the boy asked, his eyes wide with admiration. Mark smiled. "It sure is. And who's this little one?" The boy crouched down, gently petting Taylor. "This is Buddy. We just adopted him from the shelter. My mom said we could because we're at about Taylor in the paper." Mark's heart swelled. He knelt to shake the boy's hand. "That's wonderful. I'm sure Buddy's going to have an amazing life with you," the boy beamed. And as they walked away, Mark realized the magnitude of Taylor's influence. Their story wasn't just theirs anymore, it was a beacon of hope for others. That evening, Mark sat down with his laptop and typed out this acceptance email to the conference organizers. She hit send, feeling a mixture of relief and nervous anticipation. "Well, Taylor," he said, looking at the dog curled up beside him, "we're doing this." As the conference date approached, Mark worked tirelessly on their presentation. He poured over photos and videos of Taylor's journey from the first day at the gas station to their many milestones. He also reached out to Jeremy, who had continued his volunteer work and was now fostering his first rescue. Jeremy was ecstatic to hear about the conference. "You're going to be amazing, Mark. And Taylor, he's going to stealth show." Mark chuckled. "I just hope he doesn't get stage fright on the day of the conference." The venue buzzed with energy. Advocates, veterinarians, and animal lovers filled the auditorium, eager to hear stories of resilience and transformation. As Mark waited backstage, he felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Deep breaths," Sarah said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You and Taylor have got this." Mark nodded, glancing at Taylor, who's unfazed by the bustling environment. His calm demeanor was a source of comfort, a silent reminder of why they were there when their turn came. Mark walked onto the stage with Taylor. At this side, the audience erupted into applause, and Taylor, ever the showman, wagged his tail and even barked on, drawing laughter and cheers. Mark began his speech, recounting their journey with raw honesty. He spoke about the day he found Taylor, the challenges they faced, and the people who had helped along the way. Ashed described Taylor's transformation from a scared, abandoned dog to a confident and beloved companion. He could see tears in the eyes of some audience members. Taylor taught Meth that second chances are powerful.